Hi everyone, this is Jo Smart from Fi Angels. I'm back this morning to do the extra video that I promised on Shadow Self. We'll have to excuse the roadwork noise that's going on in the background. It's urban living. But yeah, so I said in my last video on cutting the cord that I was going to do one on Shadow Self as well. And the reason that I'm doing this is because about 4 weeks ago I had a dream. Now, dreams aren't usually a way that I get messages because my angels know I'm somebody who needs my sleep. So I took notice of this. And in the dream, I was doing a card reading on myself. And the rest of the cards were blurry, but there was one that was really standing out. And I don't think it's one I've got in my deck. It's not something I recognise in any of the decks I've got behind me. But the card said Shadow Self. And I remembered the dream as clear as day when I woke up. The next day, and it was on my mind all day, so I thought, okay, that is a nudge, that is something that I need to look into, either for myself or for you guys as fellow light workers. Now, it's not an area I am that familiar with. I knew about Shadow Self because it's talked a lot about on different forums that I go on, so I knew it was kind of our subconscious and bits of ourselves that we hide away, and that when somebody acts in a way towards us that really gets a reaction from us, it's because it's affecting our shadow self. That's really all I knew. So since that dream, I have kind of been doing some meditations on it and also some research on the internet. There's some really interesting articles about it on the internet, and a lot of them are written by psychologists. So what's really interesting about this is that actually it's science and spirituality combining, and the two never have to be mutually exclusive. I think that's the human part of us that likes to put things in boxes, particularly science and the opposite of science. But it's not the opposite of science at all. Everything is connected. So you don't have to think, oh, because I'm scientific or I'm a psychologist, I can't believe in this or I can't see that, or vice versa. The two actually go together in so many aspects of our spiritual journey. But we could be here all day if I go into all of that. So we're here to concentrate on the shadow self. So like I say, I've done some research and done some meditation. I have got some notes with me just in case I forget anything, because like I say, it's a new area for me that I've looked into. But because the angels gave me a nudge, I wanted to be able to share it and not feel like I have to do a year's worth of study before I share it with you. So in essence, what I've found out through the research that I've done, so I'll start with the research before I kind of go on to the meditation messages that I got. So shadow self is the subconscious part of ourselves where we put everything that doesn't represent our idea of ourselves. So nobody likes to think or admit that they can be rude, or they can be big-headed, or they can be jealous. But they're the kind of primitive survival traits that we have, that a lot of us as children don't have any fear about expressing. But as we grow up and we kind of begin to learn what is good behaviour and what is bad behaviour, those primitive, more negative aspects of our behaviours become our shadow self. So like when we were children, if we had a tantrum, and mainly having tantrums is learning how to get what we want, we'd have been told off. So we knew that that kind of angry outburst was bad and it didn't get us what we wanted. So that went into our shadow self. If we were children and jealous of some of the stuff, you see 3-year-olds, don't you? If any of you watch those documentaries on kids that are really interesting, you see, I see 3-year-olds, wanting the toy that the other one's got and just going and kind of, and it all ends in tears and, but that's jealousy. That child wanted what that other child had and went to get it, and then was told they were bad for being jealous. So eventually, as that child grows and develops, jealousy goes into the shadow self. Fear goes into the shadow self. But sometimes, particularly for those of us that the kind of light worker, light warrior types, sometimes as younger people, we might have spoken up about an opinion that we had on something, either locally or globally, and we were told we had far too much gob for our own good, that kind of thing. And so if that kept happening, then maybe that part of us, which is actually part of our purpose about speaking out and speaking our truth, becomes part of our shadow self because we've been chastised for it. Equally, if you've stuck up for a kid that's getting bullied at school and then the other kids have turned against you, then that kind of wanting to fight injustice and stick up for people less fortunate than yourself can become part of our shadow self as well. So whilst a lot of the more negative traits that we display as human beings go into the shadow, sometimes some of our more positive traits can go into shadow because we got unfavourable responses when we showed that. So shadow self is a really important part of us to get to know, because if we ignore it, anything from the subconscious, trauma, pain, all those things that we hide and box up, they do show themselves in different ways. They can show themselves in terms of our behaviours and our fear. And again, I think, one of the reasons I was nudged about this, and as well as getting the request to do the cutting the cords video last time, is because the letting go of fear card keeps coming up in the monthly readings. So we really need to dig deep in terms of, okay, how do we do that? It's all very well a card saying let go of fear, but how do we do that? Cutting the cords is a way, but also getting to know our shadow self is a way, because if we ignore our shadow self, it can present itself in other ways, including fear of speaking our truth, fear of sticking up for the person who needs sticking up for, fear of actually being ourselves and being seen, because we hide so much of who we are. So if we don't get to know our shadow self and accept it and work with it, then our ego uses it to defend itself, and our behaviours aren't always as productive or as light as they should be. It can also manifest itself in physical things like any type of stress. So, if you're not speaking your truth because you've put that into your shadow self, then your throat chakra is going to be unbalanced. If shadow self is causing you fear of being seen, then your third eye chakra is going to be unbalanced, and that can have physical, spiritual and emotional manifestations. So it's not something we should ignore, it's something we should get to know. Now, the psychologist Carl Jung spoke about shadow self. He also was the psychologist that talked about the collective consciousness, which I talk about as us being from one source. So with the collective consciousness, Carl Jung recognised that we are all connected to every single human being on the planet, energetically and spiritually. And here, like I say, it's science meets spirituality, and they come together beautifully because it explains so much. Whether you're a right or a left brain thinker, you're going to relate to this. So it is, like I say, it is steeped in psychology. So how do we know what's in our shadow self? Well, there's some ways that are quite easy to recognise if you're ready to recognise it. And I think one of the reasons shadow self is so important spiritually as well is a lot of us, light workers, light warriors, you also throw into the mix empaths, crystal children, indigo children, star seeds, Atlanteans, Lumerians. We all exist, and we're from different parts of history and the future, and we've all got different purposes, spiritual purposes and traits that come with being an indigo or a crystal or a star seed. But one of the traits that runs through all of them is we don't always feel like we understand this life. We don't always feel like we understand other people and kind of how to be a human living a spiritual life, because we think differently to people who are earlier on in their soul journeys, or their soul journey this time is to be a complete skeptic, that kind of thing. So you throw all of that into the mix, then actually, the shadow self can be really damaging if we don't recognise it. So and it can stop us and hold us back from fulfilling our purpose, which then leads to even more stress and angst. So one of the ways that you can recognise what's in your shadow self is what annoys you about other people, because we project our shadow self onto the behaviours of others. So if there's particular characteristics that really annoy you about other people, and get kind of, you know, not just a little bit annoyed, but, you know, maybe an irrational annoyance or irrational anger about other people's behaviours, that's you projecting your shadow self onto them. So, for example, me, I'm going to disclose here, I get really annoyed by know-it-alls. I'm mega annoyed, and it's something that I often say to my husband, like, stop mansplaining to me. I've never heard that saying, mansplain. Men have a particularly special way of, you know, knowing it all. But if I'm at work and, you know, someone comes across as all know-it-all, I get really annoyed. But when I think about it myself, more so in my younger days, particularly if I'd had a drink, I was the worst at turning into an armchair politician or an armchair psychologist with my own degree in psychology. Like, I know best. And so, that's why I get annoyed at people over-explaining or mansplaining, or people who, you know, maybe make a decision. But people, you know, in my work, people who are decision makers in areas where I'm not in my role, and I think that's a complete wrong decision, and I get annoyed when they just make it without an explanation. So yeah, I've got to acknowledge that part of my shadow self is that I can be a right know-it-all, and I probably over-explain stuff to people all the time and come across a bit like I know best. So that's something that I need to work on. You know, if you get annoyed with people being rude, then you might not have owned your own rudeness. If you get annoyed at people being tardy and late, and you are particularly fastidious about time, you're probably really fastidious about time because at some point you've put being tardy and late into your shadow self because you've got into trouble for it. So the things that over annoy you, over frustrate you, over anger you, in ways that other people don't seem to react in, you know, to that situation, is because it's part of your shadow self. So that is one way that you can reflect and get to know the bits that are in your shadow. And other ways is meditation, and, you know, sitting in meditation, and a bit like people do with inner child healing, is visualizing their inner child and getting to know their inner child. You can do the same with shadow. You can sit in meditation and get to know your shadow and visualize your shadow. And it's important not to visualize it as some dark demonic thing. It's part of you, and you are not dark or demonic. So it's important to kind of visualize it as a part of you that needs healing and a part of you that needs acknowledgement. So sit in meditation with it, invite your shadow self in to talk to you, and then those particular traits, and it's not saying that right, all of a sudden, yes, I've got to know my shadow, so it's fine that I'm jealous of that, or it's fine that, you know, I've been rude to that person. That's not it at all. But you get to know it so that you can work on it and you can accept it, that once upon a time that was part of you, and that you've worked on that behaviour and you've learnt lessons from that behaviour. Now, in some of my meditation around this, I also kind of got the message, or the, you know, I started thinking about past life. So some of the aspects that are in our shadow self might be baggage we've brought on from journeys in other lives, particularly if maybe we've been persecuted, or, you know, we might have a past life where we were an absolute git. You know, and some of those shadow self parts then have come back and remain part of our shadow self. So it's important that you acknowledge them as well. So even if you can't think of why, you know, in your history in this life that would be part of you, then it's a good possibility that it's part of a different journey and it's followed you into this one. So don't be surprised at what comes out. And it's important to keep yourself grounded when you're doing that work, and be kind to yourself. So whatever you find out about your shadow self, do not be ashamed of it. It's just been part of your journey. And the fact that you're facing it now and wanting to meet that part of yourself shows how ready you are to really move forward in your journey in this life, to fulfill your destiny and your purpose in this life. So it's about keeping yourself grounded, meditating, inviting your shadow self in, recognizing that a lot of what your ego says to you is because of your shadow self. So that's okay. That's okay. You don't have to do what ego says. I'd advise you not to, but acknowledge what it says, because it's telling you a bit about yourself that you maybe aren't necessarily conscious of. Recognize your own reactions, really become the personal scientist. If you have had, and I have situations that, somebody will send an email, I can think of an email that someone sent, a few months ago, and I had made a mistake and forgotten to do something, and then this person emailed every bugger and his dog. Oh, this is not good enough, but I'm like, give me a flipping break, man. People make mistakes. But that really annoyed me, and I thought, actually, is that something that I might do, is just react and become a keyboard warrior? It's something I try really hard not to do because it's too easy. But my reaction to that, I was almost in tears, so there's a fear there of being seen to be imperfect, which is probably part of my shadow self. But also, I know there's times where, okay, I haven't sent the email, but I've certainly gone, but stopped myself from sending it and deleted it, and then written something more professional. So those are the kinds of situations where if you sit back and go, okay, why did I respond like that? Why did I nearly cry over that? Why did I get really angry about that? And it's probably because there's some part of that that's your shadow. So it's about really being reflective on those situations where something like that has happened. And like I say, and be kind, and kind of do chakra balancing meditations as well, because like I say, if shadow is affecting your chakras, a really good way of managing shadow while you get to know it is by really concentrating on keeping your chakras nice and clean, spinning nice and fast, and keeping the equilibrium between all of them. So that's another way. And know that recognizing your shadow, even though it's difficult, is something that's going to help you. So it's not going to be an easy journey to do, looking back at all the parts of yourself that you'd rather not acknowledge. But getting to know your shadow will help you understand your own behaviours and help you move forward to serve your purpose in this life. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope I've explained that, because it's quite complicated, and it's not something that I really was thinking about much before I had this dream a few weeks ago. So I'm very early on in my journey with shadow, but it's something that I feel that is really important for me. So, and that's why I wanted to share it with you, because as light workers, we all go through similar things. So whether it's part of your journey yet or not, keep it in mind, and when you get a nudge like I did, come back to the video, do your own research. You can do quizzes online about your shadow, or if it's something that you've already worked on, then I'd really love to hear from you, because again, we can share some of those experiences to help the rest of the light workers out there on that journey. So that's my second bonus video of the month. What day is it today? It's 15th of May. So in a couple of weeks, I'll be doing the June reading. Wowzers. It doesn't feel like May here in the UK. It feels more like March. So hopefully in June I'll get some vitamin D. But anyway, I hope you're having a lovely month. Love and light, and I'll catch up with you in a couple of weeks. Take care.